The rhythmic crash of waves against the cliffs had become my solace. After weeks of being alone in St. Avalon, I'd come to rely on the sea's constancy. It reminded me of what life could be if I allowed it a steady ebb and flow, not the chaotic whirlpool that my marriage to Sophia had become. I rented a weathered cottage at the edge of the small coastal town, far from the bustling city we had called home for over a decade. The town's salt-tinged air was a reprieve from the life I had walked away from, albeit temporarily. Reflective hiatus, the therapist called it. It was a clinical term for something that felt far messier and more uncertain. I spent my mornings studying tidal patterns and afternoons sketching the ocean. It had been years since I'd allowed myself to draw, but here, with no one to answer to but myself, I found comfort in the familiarity of pen on paper. Evenings, however, were harder. That was when the silence became unbearable, and thoughts of Sophia crept in. I wasn't expecting her that night. The rain had come in sharp bursts, pelting against the windows as I sat at my desk, lost in a sketch of a seabird mid-flight. Her voice startled me. "It's been years since I've seen you sketch." I turned, my hand tightening around the pen. There she was, standing in the doorway, rain beading on her jacket, her hair damp. "Sophia." My voice cracked slightly, betraying my shock. "What are you doing here?" She stepped into the room, her boots squeaking softly on the wooden floor. "You invited me," she said, pulling the jacket off her shoulders. "Last week. On the phone." Had I? My memory scrambled to catch up. I had mentioned the tides, the serenity of this place. Maybe I had said something that she interpreted as an invitation. Or maybe she had simply decided to come, regardless of what I said. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," I admitted, my voice hesitant. She smiled faintly, but her eyes didn't meet mine. I wasn't sure either. We talked for hours that night. It was the first real conversation we'd had in years, free from the weight of our daily routines and the arguments that had once defined us. Somewhere between the second glass of wine and a long pause, the distance between us closed. She kissed me first. Her lips were soft, hesitant at first, and I felt myself lean into her, my hands finding the curve of her waist. It was as though my body remembered her in ways my mind had forgotten. When we moved to the bedroom, it wasn't frantic or hurried, it was quiet, deliberate. I traced her skin with my fingers, the familiar texture both comforting and painfully nostalgic. Her breath hitched when I kissed the hollow of her throat, and for the first time in months, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. This wasn't just sex. This was us trying to find our way back to each other. In the morning, the sunlight filtered through the curtains, illuminating the room in a soft, golden glow. Sophia lay beside me, her hair fanned across the pillow. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe that things could be different. But when she stirred, her eyes meeting mine, I saw the same uncertainty that I felt. "This isn't an answer," she said quietly. "It's a beginning." I nodded, unable to argue. She stayed for a week. We walked along the cliffs, cooked dinner together, and even laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from her in far too long. Yet, there was an undercurrent of tension. For all our efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, a piece we hadn't yet unearthed. Sophia left St. Avalon the following Sunday, just as the morning tide began to recede. I stood on the porch and watched her car disappear down the winding road, my chest heavy with emotions I couldn't name. Relief. Sadness. Maybe both. 4 days afterward, I immersed myself in work, trying to push thoughts of her aside. But every time I glanced at the couch where we'd sat talking late into the night or the bed we'd shared, I was reminded of her. Of us. And the question that lingered like the ocean mist, could we really fix this? One night, as I stared out at the horizon, the phone rang. It was Sophia. Her voice, though steady, carried an edge of urgency. "Jacob, I need you to be honest with me," she said. "Why did we stop trying?" Really? The question hit me like a rogue wave. I had answers, of course, exhaustion, resentment, the slow erosion of intimacy, but they felt too neat, too rehearsed. So I said nothing. "Jacob, I don't know," I admitted finally. "Maybe we got comfortable. Maybe we stopped seeing each other as people and started seeing each other as roles. You were the wife. I was the husband. And somewhere along the way, we lost sight of the rest. She sighed, a long, heavy sound. I've been thinking about that too. And I keep coming back to the same thought. What if we're holding on to something that's already gone? I clenched the phone tighter, the weight of her words sinking in. Are you saying you want to let go? No, she said quickly. I'm saying, what if we need to find something new? Not just fix what's broken, but build something different. Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. I replayed them in my mind as I walked along the beach, the cool sand sinking beneath my feet. Build something different. A week later, Sophia returned to St. Avalon, this time with a plan. We need to know each other again, she said as we sat at the small kitchen table. Not as parents. Not as spouses. As people. It felt almost too simple, but I couldn't deny the logic. Over the next few days, we began asking each other questions, ones we hadn't thought to ask in years. What's your biggest fear right now? She asked one evening as we watched the waves crash against the rocks. That I'll never feel like myself again, I admitted. Like I'll always be stuck in this version of me that's only ever reacting to life, not living it. What about you? That we'll try and fail, she said. And that failing will hurt more than walking away. Her honesty was like a punch to the gut, but I respected it. The turning point came during a hike along the cliffs. The path was steep and winding, but the view at the top was worth every careful step. As we stood there, the ocean stretching endlessly before us, Sophia turned to me. Do you remember the first time we came to the coast? She asked. I nodded. We spent the whole day looking for tide pools. You found that starfish, and I had to practically drag you away before the tide came in. She smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. You always knew how to ground me. Even when I didn't want to be. And you always knew how to push me, I said. Even when I didn't think I could handle it. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic or sudden, but it was real. We weren't just looking back, we were starting to look forward. By the end of the week, we'd sketched out a plan for the future. We agreed to continue therapy, both individually and together. We committed to weekly dates, not out of obligation but as a way to keep rediscovering each other. And most importantly, we decided to sell the big house that had become more of a burden than a home. Leaving St. Avalon wasn't easy. The town had given me clarity, a sense of direction I hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't the town that mattered, it was the work we were doing, the choices we were making. Months later, as we settled into a smaller, cozier home, I found myself sketching again. This time, it was a portrait of Sophia, her hair swept back, her eyes focused on the book in her hands.
When she saw it, she laughed. You're getting good again, she said, her tone teasing but warm. I'm trying, I replied. And that was the lesson in all of it, trying. Not for perfection, not for some idealized version of our lives, but for each other. For ourselves. The marriage we had wasn't salvageable. But the one we were building? That had potential. That had hope. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to this channel.